Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another video at my YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me today. I have a really fun no-line watercoloring video for you, and it's going to be shown in real time. After last week's no-line coloring video where I showed you a little bit of watercoloring in real time, a bunch of you asked to see more examples of this, so I thought I'd do that today. I'm using the Wish Upon a Star stamp set from Mom Elephant. Such cute images. I just can't stand it. I set it aside the minute I received it and I was like, I'm using this soon. It came out, I think maybe a couple months ago, and so I'm just breaking it out now. I'm going to be using some hot press watercolor paper today. That HP up there signifies that it's hot press. And I mentioned in that video with no-line watercoloring last week that I do like to do no-line watercoloring on hot press paper, specifically because it's very smooth. So it's easier to get like a nice sharp line around your images to define the lines of the image. So I'm going to do some stamping first on the watercolor paper. I'm using the cute image with the bunny on the cloud with the little star on a string, and I'm going to stamp it in antique linen distress ink. Another question that I received last week on this video, or on the no-line watercoloring video, was in regards to the type of ink that I use with no-line watercoloring. There was some question if I use other types of ink. I have used other inks. I've tested other colors of ink with no-line watercoloring, but none of them have performed as well as antique linen distress ink. So that's why I always just go back to antique linen. Okay, so I stamped it twice to get a really solid line, and then I used my blue painter's tape to tape it down to a hardboard. I'm going to be using some drawing gum. This is a liquid masking fluid, and I'm going to coat all of the images, the cloud, the star, the bunny, so that as I paint a background around the little scene, that area of the bunny and the cloud will be protected. Masking fluid basically is putting a coat of almost like a plastic over the top of the area where you paint it. And what you need to remember when you're using masking fluid is that you don't ever want to move on to the next step unless things are dry. So always remember to let the masking fluid dry before you start painting, and also let your painting dry before you remove the masking fluid. So I put this on with a paintbrush, and a little tip for you, that masking fluid is really gummy and it can really ruin your paintbrushes. So to prevent that, you can use a little tiny bit of dish soap or hand soap and kind of coat the bristles of the brush first. And then that drying fluid will not only fall right off that brush, but then you're able to run it under hot water and really clean out the brush later. So while the masking fluid was drying, I stamped the little image on some scratch paper and used a pencil to map out where I wanted all of my shading and shadows to be. I really find this exercise helpful, especially when doing no-line coloring. You could do an exercise like this for any type of coloring you do, whether it's no-line or with markers or with paints or anything. It's a really great thing to do. Before I get to the no-line watercoloring, I'm going to paint the background, starting with some Wilted Violet Distress ink, and I'm just putting some color down. I'm going to be doing kind of what my usual technique is for galaxy skies, except I don't want this to look so much like a galaxy, but more just like a nighttime sky. So I'm sticking to just purple and blue. This blue color is chipped sapphire, and I'm sort of just blending those colors together. And if you've seen any of my galaxy painting videos in the past, this is going to be kind of like, you've seen this before, but this really is what I do for all of those like starry skies. I first put some kind of bright colors down, and it's going to look a little funny, and you're like, how is this a sky? It looks bizarre. But the magic happens after you've dried your colorful layer, and then you add black on top. So I'm spreading all of this out, making sure I have kind of a nice shape. I'm going to dry this with my heat tool, and you can definitely go over that drying gum, that masking fluid with your heat tool. Just kind of keep it moving. You don't want to stay in one spot too long. So then I took Black Soot Distress ink, and I'm going to sort of do almost little cloud shapes, little blobs of color. And I'm going to put down some black at full strength, and then I'll get my brush wet and kind of spread that out. And you can see that that color underneath sort of glows through the black. So you're not going to get just a straight, stark black color. The colors underneath are really going to give it a little bit more dimension. So this is a great way to do a nighttime sky. And if the colors aren't as intense as you want, you can definitely add more and more layers on top. So I've basically got the black where I want it. So I'm going to heat set it with my heat tool, or not heat set it, but speed the drying process. And then I'm going to go back in and add just a little more of that purple and blue over the top, just because I wanted a little more of an intense color. And right now it looks pretty intense, but once it dries back, you almost can't even tell that I added more. So even though I did add more, you probably wouldn't need to at this point. Adding more of that chip sapphire and just going over those areas. And then I'm going to use my heat tool to speed up the drying process once again. After everything was dry, I protected the area around it with some little strips of paper towel, and then I'm using some white gouache, and I'm going to splatter on the white gouache for the stars, and that's why I wanted to protect that area around the outside. Even though it's just going onto some white watercolor paper, white gouache does sit up on the surface of the paper a little bit more than like a watercolor paint would, so any splatters, you'll be able to see the texture on top of the watercolor paper. Okay, so my favorite method of doing splatters is putting the paint on the edge of an acrylic block or anything that has a nice edge to it, and then kind of swiping off the edge of that block and splattering the paint onto the surface below. I find I have more control this way, and it's a little bit easier to get nice controlled splatters. Okay, so after I have everything dry, I want to make sure everything's completely dry. Then you can remove the masking fluid. I'm using an adhesive eraser to pull off the masking fluid, and it's kind of like this gummy plastic layer, and it comes off really easily off the watercolor paper, and it reveals the nice clean area underneath. I think masking like this is so cool. Now, one thing you want to take note of is sometimes you can get paint that collects on top of the dried masking fluid, and as you remove it, some of the paint can transfer to the nice clean area that you've protected underneath. So when you're removing your masking fluid, just be really careful and work in small areas. If you need to, you can wipe off any of that paint that's on top of the dried masking fluid before you remove it, and that will help to prevent that color from transferring. So I'm going to take a little more of that white gouache, and I'm going to go into the painting, starting out by defining the outer edges of this star. Even though I did put the masking fluid on it, it wasn't real sharp. The edges weren't sharp enough for me. So I decided to just paint over that with some white gouache. And I also used the white gouache for the string that's coming down from the pole or the stick that the bunny is holding. You could definitely do this with a white gel pen, probably would be a little bit more precise and a more fine line, but I decided to just go with the gouache since I had that out on my work surface anyway. I'm using a very, very small brush. This is a size 0 brush, and now I'm moving to a size 2 for the actual no-line watercoloring on this bunny. So if you saw the no-line watercoloring video from last week, I'll have it linked up in the top corner if you haven't. The colors I'm using on this bunny are the same colors I used on the bunny last week. So this is just another example of how to use those colors, but on a differently shaped rabbit. So this is going to be really familiar to that. I'm going to talk you through the basic painting technique or method for this no-line watercoloring, just to remind you of how I do it, and then I'll speed up the rest of the painting. I think in total, from beginning of painting the bunny until I'm done with the cloud, I think it was about 20 minutes. So that's about the time frame that we're looking at here. So my basic idea with no-line watercoloring, my basic technique is taking the more concentrated distress ink and painting it along the line of each section of the image, and then getting my paintbrush wet and then spreading the color out. So one thing you might notice as I'm working on this hot press watercolor paper is that the time that you don't have as much time to spread that color out. Watercolor paints, and in this case, the distress ink distress inks that I've watered down, they do dry more quickly on hot press paper as opposed to cold press paper. Think of it like a nice thick bath towel versus a very thin linen tea towel. You have a nice thick bath sheet that's going to absorb all that water, and that towel is going to take a long time to dry. That's like your cold press watercolor paper. You can add paint on top and you can pull it out with your wet paintbrush, and there's a little more time to really use the wet paint that's on the surface of your watercolor paper. When you're working with hot press watercolor paper, it's a thinner surface and it's more compacted and it's just smooth. And it's very similar to a very thin towel or maybe even just a piece of cloth. You add water to it, and yes, it will stay wet for a little bit, but it dries much, much faster than a very thick, absorbent towel. And it's the same thing with hot press watercolor paper. You have a little bit of time to manipulate that color, but not a ton of time. So you do want to keep moving, keep your painting pretty swift, but I do like the nice, clean, sharp edges I get on hot press watercolor paper, especially when it comes to no-line watercoloring. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to point out to you is that I have that shadow study or the practice sheet of this rabbit off to the side, and I'm referencing that over and over again as I work on this image. And I'm making sure that I'm adding the darkest areas where those shadows should be. And this is especially going to come into play once I start adding the darkest brown shade, which in this case is Vintage Photo for the actual shading on the rabbit. All right, so now I'm going to turn on some music. Hope you guys enjoy the painting. I'm going to leave it in real time so you can see how long it takes to paint. This is one of those techniques that just takes a long time. I hope you guys enjoy. I will catch up with you after the painting is finished. Okay, so that is all of the painting. I'm now going to finish up the card with just a little bit of stamping using the greeting from the stamp set, and I'm stamping that in Versamark ink. I'm going to have the words be white and white heat embossed, so that's why I'm using some Versamark ink, because that's a nice sticky ink that works well with embossing powder. I'm applying some alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, just a nice bright white, and I'm shaking off the excess. Then I used my heat tool to heat set that until it was smooth and melted. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint over that white star that's on the end of the string with some mustard seed distress ink. And I was going to keep it white, but then it just looked unfinished to me. And so I just painted the mustard seed distress ink right over the top of that white gouache. Wasn't sure if it would work, but it totally did. And I'm glad that I tried it because I really do enjoy the look of that yellow star. So that is the card for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this no-line watercoloring video, and I hope you guys try out this technique. It's super fun. I love the storybook look that it really gives to images. So on screen, I've got 3 more videos for you to check out. These are all no-line coloring videos, and I hope you'll check those out. Thank you so much for watching and clicking on those links down below to do your shopping. That supports my channel, and I really appreciate you guys. I'll be back very soon with another card video.